Thank you so much for being here. My name is Beth Finkel. I'm the Director of Employee Health and Wellbeing. I have the most awesome job of servicing our employees here and really trying to position them to be as healthy as they possibly can. I want to first and foremost thank Dean Kathy Matt for allowing my team to really be creative when trying to program for our employees here. When asking about this topic, we found it and felt that it was very important because it's relevant to everyone. We've done this series now for about 3 years, and I do think that this is the first time we've picked a topic that affects everyone and that everyone can really dig into. So thank you for being here. We have a couple housekeeping things. So there's little note cards in front of you to write down your questions, or we'll be walking around with microphones, so just raise your hand when we get to that point if you have a question, and the dean will be happy to ask our panel those questions. I'm going to be very brief tonight, but the next piece of housekeeping is we will also be doing tours of the tower at the end of the presentation this evening. We have a very impactful lineup here tonight, and I'm excited to hear the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dean Kathy Matt.
Okay. So thank you all so much for being here. Recognize a lot of faces, and I think, as Beth said, this is a topic that I think is important to all of us, and it's also one, I think, as you think about your life, there are ups and there are downs to life. And I think it is one of the things that sort of carries us through to the end of the day. This whole series of conversations in healthcare is one that we're really excited to be able to offer. So one of the other things, as I said, I recognize a lot of faces, and so I'm sure many of you are familiar with the spaces. But it's also very exciting to me tonight to be able to have the conversation here in the Audion and in the spaces that we've created. And of course, as you came in, you saw the living wall. Hopefully you also noticed some of the Charles Parks sculptures, which are here. And one of the reasons I highlight that to you now is because all of the spaces that are here were really designed with great intention and purpose to bring the outside and the environment into the spaces where we work, which is a really important part of health and prevention and well-being. There are many studies in the literature about that. It also was designed to bring the community into a university environment so that we can connect what we do in a university with what happens in the community and what those community needs are. Then at the same time, to have the community bring the challenges that we face as a community to fuel our research and our education of our students, and then also so that as our students learn, they are not only just learning from a textbook, they are learning from experiences and from their real-world experiences and their textbooks. And so this gives us an opportunity to pull all those things together. So as Beth mentioned, there will be tours that we'll do after the conversations today. And so hopefully you will, if you haven't had a chance to do a tour, that you'll take some time afterwards to do a tour. But also just a reminder to you that these buildings are all open to the public. They're open to employees. So think about, actually, as employees, if you're coming to work or when you're leaving at the end of the day, maybe you want to just come and sit in the atrium space and sort of enjoy the environment. So next up, we are very, very lucky indeed to have quite an amazing, talented group of panelists that are here today. And I want to ask each one of them to take about 5 minutes. You had their bios available to you, so you probably know their extensive background. And again, we'll sort of hear some more intimate details about sort of how that plays into their power of purpose. But right now, I'd like them to just sort of set the stage about where they are now in their life and what they're doing. And I think for that, we'll start first with RITA LANDGRAF.
Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. I'm usually in that seat as your moderator.
That's why I'm the guest tonight.
So actually more comfortable in that seat as the moderator, but it's great to be able to talk about the power of purpose because it's so extremely important. And it's a driver of your life. I am very, very fortunate that where I am today is sitting before you in this wonderful tower and able to actually continue in the work that I have loved and been driven by my entire life. I actually didn't expect that that would come. I thought I reached to the top of the hill, and then Kathy recruited me here, not only to serve as faculty in the College of Health Sciences, where I get to be a professor of practice, where when you get to be my age, they actually think that you have some knowledge that you can transfer to students here at the university. And I really crave that opportunity to work with the students here and really talk about public health and the things that I have learned not only throughout my career, but more recently as Secretary of Health and Social Services here in Delaware. I also have the honor of continuing my life's purpose by being the director of UD Partnership for Healthy Communities. And if you know me, I'm a native Delawarean. I love this state. I actually shake when I leave the state, feel much more comfortable when I'm here in my own state and really driving what matters. Actually, there's a Reverend Beeman who said to me one time, he said, "Rita, you do work that matters." And just thankful that the university has allowed me to continue to do work that matters.
Thanks, Rita. So next up, Sarah McBride.
Well, it's also wonderful to be here. Thank you all for joining us. My name's Sarah McBride, and I have the absolute privilege of working every single day in my passion for dignity and equality for all. I'm the National Press Secretary at the Human Rights Campaign, which is the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. I started there. I was living in D.C. at the time that I started there, but I too shake when I'm not in Delaware. And so they let me, a couple years ago, begin working remotely from Wilmington for the Human Rights Campaign, which is fantastic. And in that role, we have a lot of different initiatives and priorities that we're trying to push forward. The overarching one being that today in America, LGBTQ people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer individuals in this country don't have clear protections from discrimination in employment, in housing, in public spaces, and in healthcare. And so one of our major priorities is seeking to remedy that gap in our existing laws in most states and at the federal level. We're also working to make sure that specifically LGBTQ people are able to access healthcare that truly meets their comprehensive needs in an inclusive way. And for me, over the last few years, healthcare access has been really a central part of my advocacy at the Human Rights Campaign and more broadly in my life, and I'll get a little bit more into why that's the case. But right now I'm also branching out and doing some new adventures because I've seen, and I won't go into what those are, but I've seen in the work that I've done at the Human Rights Campaign that all of the issues that we face are so inextricably linked. That at the end of the day, the fight for equality for LGBTQ people and the fight for justice and dignity for working people in this country, for people of color, for immigrants, for women, for people living with disabilities, that at the end of the day, it's about access to a stable job, housing, healthcare that meets their needs, and a safe community that treats us all with dignity. And so right now I'm trying to broaden my work to make sure that we see some of the progress we've seen on LGBTQ equality here in Delaware for more people, so that we make sure that we expand the circle of opportunity and dignity for people no matter their background and no matter their zip code. And I'm fortunate to, at a young age, be able to work in something that I'm so passionate about and has touched me in so many different ways.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So John Long is one of our newest additions to the UD administration. So John?
So, hi, I've had the privilege to be at this great university now for 6 months. Not that long in the tooth yet. I came from the University of South Florida, where I spent 6.5 years in Tampa. When I got here, people were saying I'm going in the wrong direction. People are going down to Florida. Why am I coming this way? And there's a pretty easy reason why I came this way. Kathy was actually on my search committee, is when I came to Delaware and I felt the energy on the campus. I met the president, I met some trustees, I saw the vision, but I saw the energy behind the vision of what the University of Delaware was about to become. And I say that very carefully with its long storied history, but it's about to bend the curve. And I think where you are now on the Star campus is really a piece of where that curve begins to bend. The future of technology, the future of science, entrepreneurship, generating the economy for the state of Delaware, giving our students opportunities, and really giving those faculty, the world-class faculty, the facilities, and the means to continue their research to make a meaningful change in life. So when you add that all together, and gosh, how can you just not walk on that green and fall in love with the place to say, this is a place where my wife and I want it to be. Now, I say where my wife and I want it to be. If you read my bio, this was our 17th move. Did not anticipate there would be a 17th. I thought we were home in Tampa at 16 and that was going to be it. But my wife's originally from New Jersey, I'm from Long Island, so we said, hey, you know what? We'll have more than 2 seasons, hot and hotter. Now we're going to get the 4 seasons, and we can play up in the north where we haven't played for a while. But I'm just thrilled to death to have the opportunity to do what I've done my whole career. I've been around 18 to 25-year-olds my whole life. And so my role in the military, I always thought my most important role was parents entrusted their children to me, and my job was to make sure they were a productive citizen. They could spend 4 years, they can spend 24 years. That was up to them. But when they left, they were going to either have a trade or an education, and they were going to be a valued member of society. I don't see that much different on a college campus, so I think I maybe overblow it, but it's a huge responsibility because parents entrust their children to us to ensure we provide them the tools and the techniques to be productive citizens and to really walk out of the University of Delaware and make their mark on life. So I'm just absolutely thrilled to be at UD.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm glad I was on that search committee. Ty Jones.
People I like call me Ty. I kind of like her, so she can call me Ty. But first and foremost, let me just say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this panel, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And if I can, they asked me just to say, okay, who am I and what am I doing right now? Yeah. Well, what am I doing? I'm still a husband to my wife of 23 years, Donna Tucker Jones. I'm still a father of 4.
Wow.
I got grandchildren, 2 of them, who have my heart and my pocket. And I am an elder at the Resurrection Center in Wilmington. And I start there because that's not only the what that doesn't change, but it's also the who and the why I exist. 6 months ago, I decided, as I was leaving United Way as the Senior Vice President of Community Impact, that it was time for me to make a shift and change, because I needed to make sure that I continued to align everything I do to who I am. Yeah. And 6 months ago, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester called me, and she asked me to come on her staff. I didn't take that lightly, because I've never gone to a place where I didn't feel as though there was some type of alignment to who I am. I didn't go because of money, I didn't go because of fame, I didn't go because of position and or title. but because I'm there, because I believe that what I have to give to help her progress and move policy to practice, to programs that impact people's lives and build people up, that's what I'm supposed to do. So I serve as her grants and special projects director for the state. And I do so with the mindset that everything we do, when we engage people in meaningful relationships, we can change people's lives. That's why, that's who, and we can talk about the how we do it later on. But I appreciate this. And let me just say this real quick, because I think I've never publicly acknowledged her, but when I was making my transition, I was up on the 10th floor with, I believe it was the 10th floor, 7th floor, on the 7th floor with RITA, and we were talking through, Ty, what is it that you're going to do? Where are you going to go? She says, trust your gut. Don't just go someplace just for the sake of going. And I've had mentors and individuals in my circle who have consistently made that statement to me. And I brought a book with me, and I just want to share just what it is. It says, Daily Inspiration for a Purpose-Driven Life.
Oh, my.
Somebody knows it? And it was given to me by another mentor of mine, B.B. Coker. And I don't know if those who may know B.B., but she is one of our heroes in our community who has stood in the gap for many people. And she gave me that book because she said, don't forget. Don't ever forget. You may be going through a transition of time, transition of life, but don't you ever forget. And that's why she gave me this book, and it's daily scripture, daily inspirations that allow me to stay focused on my why.
Amazing. So this is why Delaware is such an amazing place. Help me thank all of these panelists for being here. And we haven't even yet jumped into their stories, but you can already tell that they're driven, there's an energy, there's a purpose, there's that desire to make an impact always. And I'm anxious to sort of delve into that some more. But there is also another very strong Delaware figure that we usually think about when we think about individuals who have made it through both good and bad times. And yet they still were able to weather that storm. And so what we want to look at right now is a very short video from Joe Biden.
Immanuel Kant said there are three pieces of happiness: something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. Without hope, there's no life. What I hope for is the ability to make things better for people who are struggling. That's the purpose in life, to treat every single person with dignity. That's who we are as a nation. That's the purpose of being, at least for me.
If you can find purpose in your life and you can turn the loss of the person you love into devoting your time to what they would be doing were they still alive. But eventually, what will take you through is purpose. Find a purpose, something that matters, particularly if it's something connected to the loss you just had. And so, I'm being too personal, but if I get up in the morning and I think to myself every morning, is he proud of me? Am I doing what he wants? And I'm sure that it's the same way with you and a whole lot of other people.
So before we kick off the panel, I have one other thing that I want to just mention. So when I was in Arizona, I used to work with a clinical psychologist at the Veterans Administration who worked with individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder. And what was very interesting and taught me a lot from this particular woman, Martha Kent, was that she grew up in a concentration camp in Germany. And she learned so much in that concentration camp and then turned that into her career in clinical psychology and then translated that to being able to help veterans who came back and had post-traumatic stress disorder. And so she and I, my background is as a physiologist and studying stress and linkages to disease and sort of looking at how that results in physiological changes. And so the psychological and the physiological are all intertwined. And one of the quotes that she used to always present in her talks is this one that I think relates to the very topic of this evening about the power of purpose. And I think it is what gets us through tough times and helps us to cherish the very happy moments in our life. And so the quote is that happiness is the exercise of vital powers along lines of excellence in a life affording them scope. And so I think that's the thing that most of us seek, is that opportunity to have a scope, no matter what we are, whether we're an employee, whether we're staff, whether we're a faculty member, whether we're a community member. It's like, how do you have scope in your life and then be able to do the things that you do to a very high degree that you're satisfied with. And then, like, the greatest gift that you can get is then being able to have an impact and be able to change someone's life. And clearly, you even heard in these 5-minute introductions by each of these people that clearly there's a lot of story to be told here. So I'd like to start first with the question of, and I'm going to start with some questions, and as Beth said, and many of you have attended this before, then please, as soon as you're ready to start asking questions, please just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over to you, because again, I'm sure as you heard each of their stories, you have a lot of questions to ask them as well. But I'd like each of you to think about this question. Can you give an example of how purpose has helped you to get through some of the times in your life, both good and bad? So John, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I had a big chip on my shoulder coming out of high school. I had an aunt and uncle who had moved close to us in Florida, and I had my uncle tell me that I was worthless and I'd never amount to anything. And so that was game on. That was the first time I realized that I really did have a focus if I wanted to have a focus. And so I was going to go to college. I was going to be successful. And I did. And I think the day I made Colonel, I sent a subliminal message to my mother to tell her sister, to tell her husband, he could stick it in his eye. Because I'd gone from an E3 to an 06 in 20 years. And I think I made a success of myself. So I took that negative period, which at 17 years old, that's a hard thing to hear, that you're worthless and you're never going to amount to anything. But I just twisted the table and put the monkey on his back and said, well, we'll see about that.
Yeah, excellent.
And I just used that. I've used that as a motivator since I was 17. I'll be 59 next month. Every time I get down, I pull that story out of the back of my brain and I say, game on.
Yeah, excellent. Sarah?
I think for me, there's sort of 2 points or 2 experiences in my life that sort of inform my purpose and inform my work. And both of them, I think, in many ways sort of encapsulate the saying that the political is personal and the personal is political. First, I come to my work as an LGBTQ advocate, as someone who is transgender, and who came out when I was at college at American University while I was serving as student body president. And growing up, wondering whether the heart of this state that I love, wondering whether the heart of this country was big enough to love someone like me, I took a lot of comfort in reading the history books and in seeing that the story of our society and the story of us as a people is this constantly widening circle of dignity and equality. And that for me, it provided a hope that maybe there could be space for people like me in this world too. And so when I came out and I was met with a supportive family and supportive friends, I thought, my God, this was the most difficult thing that I had ever done up until that point, but it was still so easy compared to the experiences of so many other people. And for me, I got into this work because I wanted to ensure that the privileges that I have are no longer a privilege for the few, but a right guaranteed to everyone. Because it shouldn't be a privilege to be able to keep your job. It shouldn't be a privilege to be able to stay in school after you come out. And it certainly shouldn't be a privilege to be safe from violence. But for me, the experience that I think more than anything else defines my purpose and guides me in understanding that there is a path through hardship was my relationship with my husband, Andy. And so I do this work not just as someone who is trans, but as someone who's loved someone who's transgender. I met Andrew Cray at the White House during the Obama administration. We bumped into each other. And he followed up, as any good millennial does, with a Facebook message. And unlike most millennials, said that he thought we'd get along swimmingly in that Facebook message. And I thought, who the hell says the word swimmingly? But clearly someone I want to spend some time with. And so Andy and I began dating. I first fell in love with his courage, with his optimism, with his intellect. He was an attorney, and his life's mission was expanding access to health care to underserved communities. And getting to work with him, falling in love with him, I got to see his work firsthand. I got to see the importance of that work firsthand. And it became far more poignant to me when, about a year to a year and a half into our relationship, he was diagnosed with cancer. And he was fortunate enough to have health insurance, and we were both fortunate enough to have a job that allowed us the flexibility to take care of his health. He got a clean bill of health after undergoing treatment, and then 8 months later received the news that every single cancer patient fears. His cancer was back, it had spread, and for him it was terminal. And so when Andy found out that he didn't have much time left, he asked me to marry him. We were fortunate enough to marry on the rooftop of our apartment building in August of 2014. And then just 4 days after that, he passed away. And for me, knowing and loving Andy left me profoundly changed. He taught me how to love and be loved. He taught me how to live the values I fight for at work in my own life. But more than anything else, my relationship with Andy underscored for me that change cannot come fast enough. And after he passed away, I went through the different stages of grief. And eventually, I truthfully landed on anger. And I'm not an angry person by nature. Anger is such a waste of energy, and I'm just too lazy for it. But I was angry. And I was angry that society's prejudices and pre-existing dogmas had kept the love of my life inside of himself for what ended up being a majority of his life because it was cut so short by cancer. And I was angry that society had taken that time and truth away from him. And so for me, getting through that experience was, one, trying to channel that righteous anger into action. And two, to try to carry forward the work and legacy that he had in expanding access to health care to underserved communities. And in doing that, and listening to the Vice President just so resonates with me, I feel like I'm keeping Andy alive. I feel like I'm keeping him with me, and I'm still feeling his love every single time I am able to talk about him, every single time I'm able to push forward equality and dignity, and every single time I get to make sure that our healthcare spaces are a little bit more accessible and inclusive of people like us.
Thank you, Sarah. So, Ty, how does purpose fit for you?
First of all, Sarah, thank you for sharing that. We appreciate that. There are moments in time when I can share where purpose drove me beyond who I thought I was at that moment.
Yes.
But I graduated from this university, and I also played football at this university. And I can remember my junior year, it was second or third game, and at that time we weren't doing as well as we should have been doing. And I was free safety, and I was basically the captain of the defense. And Tubby came up to me and he says, "You're not doing the job. You're not doing the job." And he sat me, and I platooned with another gentleman, and I understood, at that moment in time, I was angry. I wanted to leave school.
Yeah.
But it was my father who was first black police officer in my town, who shared with me the value of continuing to persevere through. Regardless, continue to persevere through. And continue to build yourself up in that moment not allow it to condemn who you think you are. Because oftentimes we do go through trials and tribulations where we start to condemn ourselves. We start to tear ourselves down. And it was at that moment that that instance, that situation taught me, don't tear yourself down. And after that, I made sure that I was never platooned again. I made sure that everybody understood my position and I understood my position. That's one instance in time, but the instance in time that it's really transformed who I am is a young man by the name of Wayne Thomas. When I left this university, the professor, my freshman year professor gave me my first job working with the Delaware Center for Justice, or the Delaware Council on Crime and Justice, Christine McDermott. She gave me my first job working with young people coming out of Ferris School, helping them with their transition and their transformation back into the community. And Wayne, I had to take Wayne home one weekend for his weekend pass, and I had to drive him to Milford. And we're driving downstate, and first time I've driven downstate, and he told me to turn off. And I turned, and it was down this dirt road. And Wayne shared with me that this is where he lives. And for those of us who remember the history of slavery, it was as though I was going back in time, because he was living in a shack with no hot and cold running water. He had lines for electricity going from one place to the next. And Wayne went home that morning, and that night Wayne got rearrested because he got drunk because he did not want to stay home anymore. And it was Wayne who I remember every time I realized there's more I can do. That I should be and will continue to be about building people up, changing structures and systems that are going to allow people to live their fullest life. And that it wouldn't be about me anymore. It wouldn't be about my self-preservation. It wouldn't be about me progressing in areas that would give me notoriety or whatever the case may be, but it would be about Wayne. Because Wayne didn't have that opportunity. Wayne didn't have mom and dad at home. Wayne didn't have that support system that I had. Wayne didn't have those various support programs that were available within the community. Wayne chose to be locked up. And when a young man decides that he'd rather be locked up, then the future is no longer his. So that's my why that continues to propel me. And one other instance, if you don't mind, and they just so happened to be a tragic situation, and I ran a program called Project Stay Free, provided 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week support for young people coming out of Ferris at a time when they needed us the most, whether it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 1 o'clock in the morning. And Kevin Smith was a young man who was doing everything he was supposed to do, everything he was supposed to do. Got a job, got his GED, walking home one late evening, and he got shot in the back of his head. I will never forget how I felt, because I had to leave my job then, because I couldn't handle this young man's death, but it still was something that propelled me to the next area in which I was supposed to be. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was. And that continues to drive me to seek the change that we all want to see, and not be a part of a conversation anymore about young people dying without people stepping in and doing what they're supposed to do. And whether it's creating a healthy community, make sure the faith-based community is doing what it's supposed to do, or making sure the government is supposed to do what it's supposed to do. I am not fearful of that, having that conversation anymore, nor will I ever.
So you can really hear in these comments how people take the various things that happen in their life, but then can turn that in a way that then fuels that next step that really makes a positive outcome. And Rita? What is your story?
So it is interesting because these are life-defining moments
Yes.
that many times, as Kathy, as actually all the panelists, they weren't necessarily a positive moment in their life, but they were a life-defining moment and I also like to think that we can't really experience joy until we've experienced sadness.
Yes.
And really appreciate those emotions. So I was very blessed that my life-defining moment that actually has guided my purpose and my entire career occurred when I was 12 years old. And I was living in a little neighborhood, and there was a group of kids about my same age, and we would gather on the street. Unfortunately, Ty, kids in the city of Wilmington don't always get that same opportunity. I lived in a safe neighborhood where we could come out, and it was summer, gathering in the street. And we noticed, because everybody in my little neighborhood knew each other, we noticed this little boy was trying to venture into our neighborhood. And he was probably from the neighborhood next to our neighborhood. And he had this wonderful little red bike. And he would come down and he would look at us and with just like the joy, like, wow, I found my people that I can come play with. And I remember something about that little boy whose name was Mike. He might have been just a little bit different than the rest of us. And at that time, because I am older than anybody else
No.
No, you're not.
on this panel, except for
Do we have to go
except
into
for
the-
maybe one who will remain nameless. But anyway, at that time, this little boy was one that other children would not invite in. In fact, if they invited this little boy in, they invited him in to make fun of him. This little boy at that time, we used the words mental retardation. And so can you imagine some of the words that we were using for this little boy? Now, mind you, I knew what we were doing was absolutely wrong. And I did not participate in the name calling or setting him up as a court jester. But I also did not do anything to stop it from happening. And Mike knew what was going on. And I remember watching the look in Mike's eyes, and it impacted my soul. However, that day, an advocate was born. And I swore that day, at the age of 12, I would never remain silent again when it impacted people with disabilities. And that, for me, was the gift of Mike, because Mike was my greatest teacher in life. And Mike gave me a gift of purpose. Because then when I came to the University of Delaware, at that time, we didn't have disability studies. I'm so happy now we have a minor in disability. And I get to talk about equity, especially relative to people with disabilities. But indeed, I then moved on to an organization called the ARC, which serves individuals with disabilities and their family to enhance the quality of their life. It led me to actually meet my future husband, Kurt Landgraf, who at that time worked at DuPont. And I went and I talked about creating a program called Friend to Friend, which matches individuals from his company with individuals with intellectual disabilities. So because of the gift of Mike, I gained my husband. I gained the gift of Chris, who is my stepson, who has intellectual disabilities, who lives with me and actually takes care of me. Then I moved on to support people with mental illness through the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. And that's when I actually did a lot of work really advocating for services for people with disabilities with the state of Delaware, and in particular, the Department of Health and Social Services. And then when Jack Markell came into office, He said, "We haven't done enough for people with disabilities, Rita." He knew that I had actually brought litigation to the previous secretary of that department for not doing enough to serve people with disabilities in the community. And then he offered to me to be the cabinet secretary for the Department of Health and Social Services. So that Mike on the red bike, even though I would want to take back that day, there was a purpose for that day. Oh, and I've seen Mike since that time. When I was at the ARC, Mike actually got services from my organization. I shared my story with his father. And Mike is living the American dream. He got married. He traded the bike in for a car. He can actually drive his red car.
That's great.
And he works at the Newcastle Farmers Market.
Beautiful.
So I shared with Mike and his father that the greatest gift that I had in my purpose was Mike on the red bike.
Oh, that's great.
Beautiful.
Now, you're going to talk about your next project, or no? We're not allowed to talk about
We
that
can
here.
come back.
Okay. Rita, of course, I'm sure you can tell from all these speakers and panelists up here, this is only the beginning. There's lots more that they're going to do after this. So I hope everybody will indulge me just for 1 second, because as I heard each of these stories, it reminded me my first job as a faculty member was at a medical school. I'm looking at Cole because maybe he can relate to this. And I came in as an assistant professor and at a medical school, and I was going to change the world. So I had classes to teach with medical students, and I thought, I am going to change all of healthcare. Well, I did not do very well as an assistant professor, teaching my students what I thought they needed to learn. There was a lot of pushback from them. There was a lot from the administration. I actually had a mentor who was at Temple because I grew up in Newark, went to UD, did my undergrad and master's here and PhD at University of Washington. And I'll never forget, he was a faculty member at Temple in the medical school. I called him on the phone and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? I'm teaching these students what they need to learn and they don't want to learn it. And there's all these complaints against me. And he goes, Kathy, you have to do what you have to in order to do what you want to. So, and you have to go step by step. So I had to change how I teach. I had to change how I did my research. I mean, I learned a lot. Now, and I'm not going to tell you how many years later, now I'm a dean of a College of Health Sciences, and we are intent on changing healthcare. So we don't forget these purposes, and it's funny, they sort of come about in different ways, and you don't always see how all the experiences you have in your life are actually going to come together and contribute to that. And one placeholder that I want to put in here as well, we just opened a new labyrinth that is at the north end of the first building near the curved glass. That labyrinth was actually requested, and the whole idea of it came from our physical therapy students who actually wanted to recognize the families of the anatomical donors so that they have these bodies to be able to learn their physical therapy on in the gross anatomy lab. And so they wanted this labyrinth as a way to remember all those families, but at the same time to give back to the students. And one of the things about a labyrinth is it's like a metaphor for life. So you think that you're going to go from A to B and go right from the outside to the center, but that's not what happens. You actually get close to the center. You just follow the path, and it takes you close, and then it takes you back out. And it takes you close, and then you finally get to the center, and then it's a journey back out again. So when you have the time, please do the labyrinth. But this is something that we tell our students all the time as well. It's not a straight path from A to B. You go A to B to C to D to E. The one other comment that I wanted to make as well, and I think it's really important to make it here, you've heard a little bit of each of these stories, and one of the things that it strikes
Your
me...
mic's out.
Yeah. One of the things that it strikes me
They can't
is
hear you.
that you cannot hear at all.
No, so either, yeah,
Usually people can hear me.
yeah, usually she's loud.
But one of the things that you usually assume when you see very accomplished people is that their life has been a paved path and it was an easy journey. And I think you've already heard from each one of them that it's more challenging than you expect. So are there any questions from the audience? Yeah. Ryan.
Your mic. No, you're...
They're not working.
So my question to you is, the large majority of you are changing things on a very large scale. So all of the work you're doing is impacting large amounts of people. So my sort of question is, how can you take these, whether it's techniques you're using, how can we do this on an individual level? So how can I use purpose in my own day-to-day to make sure that I'm doing my job well, or that I'm being the best parent I can be? So in sort of bringing it down to the smaller scale, do you have any suggestions of how we can kind of use purpose to fuel our individual selves?
Perfect.
If I could, real quick. And this is something I had to realize as I was developing my inner self. Purpose doesn't mean perfect. And oftentimes we try to be perfect in everything that we do. How many of us are perfectionists?
Oh, a little bit.
Those who didn't raise your hand, I know you are undercover perfectionists. I was one who wanted to be perfect all the time. I drove my staff to be perfect at one point in time. I drove my wife to be perfect, my kids to be perfect, to the degree where I was not bringing them to me, I was pushing them away. And I was taught perfect is never a goal within itself. It's being present and being present with them and who I am. So I really had to go into my inner house. I have an inner house here. I call my house at home my sanctuary, but there's an inner house here that I constantly have to go back into. I got to retreat, I got to go, reflect back in order for me to come back out. Because if I don't, I'm going to constantly start driving myself and others away because I know that about me. So I tried to make sure I understand my purpose, building others up. But Tyrone, you got to take care of yourself. You got to take care of your family. And don't drive so hard to the degree where you push people away. And I was that type of person. I drove people because I was so passionate about my purpose. But it really wasn't beneficial. All it was doing was saying, okay, you're looking great, but you're tearing your people down, or you're tearing your family down, or whatever the case may be. I had to go back into that inner house, and I had to reflect. And just so that y'all know, I feel constrained by this chair right here. Oftentimes I like
I know
to
you're
get up.
behaving yourself.
You know, I'm like ready to jump out. But so that's, how I deal with me.
So are there others that would like to contribute to that? John?
Well, I think you got to be able to look at the big picture in everything you do and realize the things that frustrate you most times, they're not worth your time to frustrate you. And so you can dig on anger, or you can use critical thinking skills and say, does that really matter? Is that really worth getting in an argument over my spouse as to was the car on the wrong side of the driveway because I had a bad day, so I'm going to come home and get upset about it? Is it really worth getting in an argument with a coworker because, which may be because they microwave fish in the office, and that's against the rules for office etiquette? But are you really going to let that ruin your day? So I think or if the kids are misbehaving, I think you got to have some introspective to say, out of the gamut of everything that happens in my life, is this really the hill I'm going to take today? Mm-hmm. Or I just have to let it go, decompress, and move on, and don't focus on so much negative. I mean, life is too short to focus on negativity all the time. I mean, I don't have time for negative people, and I tell that to people all the time. I mean, I'm only here for so many more years. That's one thing I'm guaranteed, and that's going to end. So I'm not going to spend the rest of my time with negative people, focusing on negative things with the little bit of time I have left. So I think, whether it's the kids at the soccer game, whether it's the spouse, whether it's an aunt, whether it's the department store clerk, I think you got to really put it in perspective and say, is this not that you're a pushover, but is this really something to waste my energy on and get upset about? And I think if you look at a lot of situations that way, you'll probably find 95% of the time, it's not worth it. There's going to be that 5% where you're going to have to say, okay, this is a line too far. But the rest of the stuff, it just isn't worth getting upset about.
I'm still trying to figure out how you got through 17 moves.
Didn't get upset.
I'll tell you, this is kind of funny, but it's not, because I've done it the last 3. So here was always the pinch point. Hanging pictures in the new house. My wife and I would fight for 2 days straight, constantly. Hang it there. Well, maybe 3 inches there. Well, 4 inches there. All right, put the nail on the wall. I think it needs to go over there. So you do that. So you know what? You got to use some critical thinking skills. The last 3 moves, I hired a handyman. I go to work. I come home. The pictures are hung. There's no arguing. We go out to dinner that night, and life is great.
Nice.
I think there's a question. There's a question there.
Yeah. Hi. I am thinking about purpose and having control and listening to you talk about people who choose a life without control. But what about the people who are brought up to believe they're not capable of forming a purpose or managing their lives independently? People who receive negative messages from the world around them, from others who don't even realize they're giving negative messages, from media, whatever. How can we change our views of these lives to say, yeah, if you want to do this, you can do this? It's going to be a hard journey to get to the point where you can be the one who says what's going to happen in your life, but I believe you can do it. That doesn't come from enough sources. And people live with ugliness and depressing aura around them. And how are we going to change that? I had a pretty crappy experience and many, many years of people telling me, you're not going to amount to anything, you lost it. And I had to fight against that. And it took a huge amount of energy to get to where I wanted to be, but it took more energy to be angry and determined, and it reflects now. Determination, impatience, as Tyrone says, drives people away. But you got to do it. Well, wait. If you've had positive influences, is that going to happen? I hope not. So what do you all think about that? How can we change to give our positive influences to convince the upcoming generation that they have what it takes to speak for themselves, to be Greta Thunbergs,
Yes.
to control their own existences, and maybe influence that of others too?
So I think that's a great question, and it's amazing that you brought up Greta, because as you're asking the question, I was just thinking about Greta, who was attacked for being autistic, and she said that her autism is her superpower. Mm-hmm. And I think your question just gets to such a powerful point that whether we're talking about popular culture, whether we're talking about what we see in the news, whether we're talking about the people we elevate to positions of leadership in business or in politics, you name it, we have to recognize that diversity, whether it's the diversity of our identities, the diversity of our background, that those are our superpowers, that the adversity that we've experienced has made us stronger and smarter and more compassionate people. It gives us that power to get through the more difficult times and the moments where society will try to build barriers in our way. And I think part of that comes from making sure that we're empowering people of all those different backgrounds to have the microphone or to have a seat at the table, because it's very difficult to be what you can't see. And so I think that's a huge part of it. And I think the other is to recognize that when we're talking about diversity, we should be talking about it in a way that doesn't cast it as some abstract neutral or as something that we love you in spite of that, but that we love you because of your differences. We love you because your diversity makes our society more beautiful. And that at the end of the day, it is that superpower. It is the fact that you've conquered that adversity, you've persisted through that difficulty. It's that you've exercised the individual agency to conquer your fears and insecurities, whatever it may be, that is a power, and you carry that power with you from the safest of spaces to the scariest of places, and we need that message across all boards.
And I think to Sarah's point too, is find a mentor. And I think Ty brought that up because we continuously evolve if we're open to that transformation. I must tell you, when I stepped out of the role as cabinet secretary, it was very difficult for me to get grounded again, because our titles aren't necessarily who we are. But through our lives, we will continuously transform. How do we ground ourselves and also rely on others to support us through those critical times, and others who are different from us, but others also who might look like us. So I rely on those who walked before me, who had been in that role and then transitioned out, and called them and said, how do you do this? How do you transition out when you had this fabulous opportunity to really bring your purpose in a most profound way? And through also being offered the next before you get put out to pasture, when you get to be our age, Kathy, that you have others that then really rely on, the advice from others. Because this world, and, unfortunately right now, can really bring you down, right? And does everybody remember in this room Mr. Rogers? Won't you be my neighbor? Well, Mr. Rogers told a story about his mother, and he used to say that he would become frightened by things that have occurred in this world. Bad things are going to happen, and I think John, went through and protected our country during 9/11. Things to that magnitude, or what we're experiencing in our country with the mass shootings, they're very traumatic events, right? But what Mr. Rogers' mother used to say to him when he faced a traumatic event, she would say, yes, that is a traumatic event, but I want you to pause, and I want you to watch, and I want you to see the humans that will run to the aid of others.
Yes.
And that is the beauty in the tragedy. So even when horrific things happen, or that's the big T in trauma, or the little t in trauma, if you watch, people will come and people will comfort and support you. So I would advise that you align yourself with the positive and that wonder of mentorship, because as human beings, we need those connectors.
So we have a question in the back.
Yes.
Thanks, Rita.
This question is specific to the folks on the panel who deal with the millennial generation on a daily basis, on a regular basis. How do you, so especially in collegiate environments, there are lots of people who are in colleges, going to school, especially our young people, who are in a specific, their lives are on a specific trajectory. They're in this program. They're not quite sure. From personal experience, I know I changed my major about 3 times when I was an undergrad. I'm not quite sure what I want to do. I think this is going to make money. I think it probably might. My mom's going to be okay with it. I want to please her too. I want to please myself. How do you address those young people who have not yet found their purpose? How do you help direct them and channel their energies into something that is meaningful first to them? How do you teach them? What tricks do you use to help them find their own purpose?
So who would like to take that first?
I'll take a stab at it because I just recently had an experience. In our office, we had a couple interns from the University of Delaware, and had a young lady there who was trying to determine as a sophomore whether or not she wanted to remain at the university or drop out of school and or go someplace else, because she didn't feel wanted and she didn't think that she was on the trajectory that she wanted to be. And that if she left school, then her dad would be upset and so forth. And the first thing for me is, and I think it's key with anything that we do, because oftentimes we think we know too much, is to listen. And I had to hear her for what she was saying, and then ask her to go back into herself and really start thinking through what is it that she wants to do, and have that dialogue and conversation with her, not just on one occasion, but on a consistent occasion, because it's something that she needs to hear, or she needs to hear herself say more than one time. So there's got to be an engagement between her and I can't be afraid to have that conversation with her, or we can't be afraid to have that conversation. Careers and choices that we make, we got to own what it is that we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and we got to teach young people how to do that. But it's going to take first knowing what it is that they're thinking about and then engaging them. So it has to be consistent engagement that has to take place from my perspective.
And I would just add a comment as well to what Ty said is, again, one of the things that we try to do, and again, this is the spaces that you're in today and sort of seeing what we've done here, it really is to advance the opportunity for more experiential learning, whether they're volunteering in a clinic or they're doing research in a lab or they're in interdisciplinary groups that they work together on a project. It's really to continue to give them a diversity of experiences so that we can help them figure out and find what lights their fire. And sometimes they don't know where that's going to come from. And so, and again, it's back to also creating an environment that is very, very diverse. I remember when I was an undergrad here, my advisor said, take all these different classes. I was a biology major. Expose yourself to a lot of different things. This is where you're going to learn and you're going to grow. And don't put blinders on that you know exactly. I mean, you're going to go in a direction, but really, and that's my message. That's our message that we give to all of our incoming freshmen. And again, similar to what Ty said, to keep encouraging them. And I also think that is another uniqueness about Delaware, because we not only expose them to things here in the university campus, but because of the small state that we are, we bring in all these amazing experts from around the state who are high up in offices. I mean, this is how I got to know RITA. I mean, we started when I started here as a dean over 10 years ago and started working, and students in my class got to pitch their ideas to the secretary, to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Services. And one of those students was really trying to find his way. He was lost. He met her, and boy, that idea, he just ran with it. And so you never know where it's going to come from, and I think it's really being able to expose them and then to cultivate them and give them the support. Sarah?
I think to build off of that, two things come to mind. The first was a piece of advice that I got early in my career, and I was worried that if I started down one track, I'd get sort of boxed in and pigeonholed into a specific kind of work. And the person who had worked in everything from LGBTQ advocacy to working for NASA basically said to me, don't worry, you can reinvent yourself. And I think we fall into this trap so often, partly because of just the history of people working in the same career or the same field or for the same company for 40 years, that our purpose or what we do with our life, whether it's the professional purpose or personal purpose, is a lifetime endeavor. And I think we have to give people the space to say, that can evolve and change. Right. Your purpose can change day to day, year to year, decade to decade. And you can always reinvent yourself, and you can always find new purpose. The second thing, I think, on the millennial question, too, that I've experienced firsthand, because I was a millennial who very quickly figured out what my passion and purpose was. I'm a millennial who, and I'm a millennial who had the opportunity to be mentored by some incredible individuals. Jack Markell in particular was a mentor of mine, which is how I met Secretary LANDGRAF. And let me just say, she's the best Secretary of Health and Social Services that the state has ever had. And my guess, I don't know if this is factually accurate, but we're in a post-fact world, that you may have probably overseen the largest expansion of access to health care in our state in probably 60 years.
Yes, under the Affordable Care Act.
That's right, and that was huge, and you seized the moment, and a lot of other places didn't. But one of the things that I was so lucky to have was a mentor in Jack Markell, who even when I was 13 years old, talked to me like I was an adult, and was willing to listen to me and take in my thoughts and opinions, and that level of respect changed my life. Because I could be 13 or 14 and be in a space and feel like I belonged there and feel like my voice mattered. And I think that it's simple, but giving the respect to young people to listen to them and to recognize that their perspective is important, because frankly, at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that write the history books of tomorrow, and they're going to get to decide whether we were right or wrong in this moment. And so their perspective really matters in that way. But I think giving that respect is so important. I think it's the key to allowing young people to feel empowered to explore that passion and purpose.
I want to go counter to everybody else. So,
Of course.
of course.
Of course you do, John.
So I'm going to take it from a little bit different perspective, which is I'm going to speak heresy. First of all, I don't think everybody should be in college. They're not ready for it yet. I said I dealt with 18 to 25-year-olds my whole life. I'm going to be stereotypical. I've not met many 18-year-old males that are ready to take on that challenge and really succeed to their potential. By the time they get to 20, they may have kind of sorted it out. So I dealt with them in the Air Force because, I don't know if anybody knows the statistic, less than 1% of anybody of age in the United States, America, to serve has ever served. We're less than 1% of a nation that's ever put on a uniform. Most of the kids that go in the military now are going in, not so much because they're patriots, and I don't fault them, they're going in for a better life. The GI Bill, to earn a trade, some discipline. They may have come out of a rough neighborhood and it was get killed or go put a uniform on. Oh, by the way, which they might get killed by putting that uniform on. But there's ulterior motives. And so I worked with them, a lot of young men and women who weren't ready for college yet. They knew they weren't ready for college yet. They needed that discipline and purpose and focus, but their intent was to go to college. And they picked up tools and techniques that the military taught them. Get up on time, go to work, be loyal, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, be honorable. And we're able to take that after 4 years and transcend that and then go to college. The transformation from that 18-year-old to 22-year-old after that 4 years in the military is phenomenal. And I'm very passionate about veterans. I feel it's my inherent responsibility to pay it forward. I work with a lot of veterans, mostly remotely. I review resumes all the time about people saying, I'm getting out. How does this look? If you look at a lot of veteran students, they're like top performers. And again, you put a 22 or 24-year-old in the classroom with an 18-year-old, it's a very different mindset. Most veterans don't ask for any help. They're just thankful to get what they get. So to give them an opportunity to get an education, man, they're going to take it and they're going to run with that. And so they're self-motivating. But I don't think college is, I think that's a myth, and I know I'm in a bad place to say that, but not everybody should necessarily go to college, and certainly I think the data shows persistence rates between males and females. Females are much higher than males at that point. And I'll speak from experience. I've got a 31-year-old son who flunked out of college after 6 years. We cut him off after the 4 years. Then I was naive enough to give him my GI Bill for a year, which I had to pay back because he flunked that. My daughter graduated with 3 degrees and is an RN in 4 years.
Wow.
They both grew up in the same house.
Yeah.
They had the same parents. They had the same underlying childhood. Now the son who flunked out, went into the military, and was picked to learn one of the top 3 toughest languages in the world, Persian Farsi, and graduated from Defense Logistics as an honor graduate. And I got to go, my wife and I got to go to his graduation. I went in my uniform, and I just kind of like wanted to smack him upside the head and say, you learned the 3rd hardest language in the world, and you couldn't get through 6 years of college? So, you know, part of it is you got to realize what you're ready for. And I think we as a society, I mean, I would love to have 2 years service for everybody. I mean, not necessarily conscript, but hey, do 2 years in the military, do 2 years in the Peace Corps, do 2 years at the Parks Department. Do whatever it takes till you're mature enough to value that education that you're going to get. Because it's not just one big party.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of, especially males, I'll be stereotypical, I don't think their brains are wired yet. Not all of them. Some succeed quite well and are done in 3 years. I think the majority of them, their brains are not developed enough to comprehend what they have to do to be successful. And I think a little bit of hard work of laying bricks or digging footers does an amazing thing to get your mindset about what's important.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, excellent. I think there is a question. Yes.
Hello. First of all, I want to say thank you for participating and sharing your stories. It seems very obvious to me, at least, that purpose is often very personal. It really serves these stories, these experiences that are difficult. Often we think they're horrible at the time, but when we look back, it is the building on those experiences that has given strength to deal with a really bad experience that you could not have been, there's no way you could have prepared yourself any other way but having traveled through that. So first of all, I have to say I agree almost with everything you have all said and shared. But I did want to say something to the lady over in the yellow. Having gone through a few things myself, and I think everyone in the room has a story. We're all, and yeah, we're not to be defined by it. But I did want to share that, you know, we're always so worried about when we hear on television these days about weight, for instance, our diet. We're always thinking about what we're putting in our mouth, or at least I am. All my life, I've dealt with it. But then I had an experience where it occurred to me that maybe I should really start thinking about what I'm putting into my head, into my mind. And I thought of all the toxic thoughts that I could allow, or I don't have to allow. So what I decided to do, as challenging as it was sometimes, was to try and control the thoughts that I allowed into my head and go on a toxic-free thought diet. So that not just what goes in here, but what goes in here, and not allow other people to make me feel any less than what I am or make me feel horrible, and not allow them to do that to me. And I can tell you it's not easy. It takes practice to control your thoughts as to what goes in. But when you can get a handle on it, and you're right, no one wants to be with someone who's putting other people down. So I found that really helpful, and I just wanted to share that. And all those bad experiences, they're strengthening. And anger, I don't view it as a negative. I view it as, like you said, a source. It's not that it's bad or good. It's just it served to motivate me and keep me on my feet when really nothing else would have done the job. So use what you have to, and use that anger and put it in such a direction of positivity that when you go through all that shit, if I may be so bold,
That's really bold.
that's really bold, and Ty knows a little about me. When you go through all of that, the only real tragedy, and this is what I've learned from listening to others, is the real tragedy would be if you didn't learn from that experience.
Yeah.
It's what you take away from that experience. As horrible as it may be, there is something to be gained out of every bad thing. I guarantee the universe is really crazy about trying to maintain a balance. There will be some good to come from it. So I don't really have a question. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much for that comment. And I think it was very valuable in the last point that you made. I think it's true that, we can sort of decide the things that we want to say in a meeting or how we want to present ourselves or in a particular situation. And maybe it doesn't always turn out the way that we planned, sometimes worse than others. And so you can start to replay that over and over again in your head, which really is not to a great outcome. It's sort of like, what did I learn from that? How will I do it differently in the future? And actually, it also reminds me that I was in a meeting this week talking about burnout in physicians and physician burnout. And what the studies have shown and what was being discussed in the meeting is that there are a lot of things that you can play through in your head when you put your head on your pillow at night. And what they found in these physicians is, and it might surprise some of you, is that they don't play the record about the patient that got better and the patient whose life you saved or family member, or you diagnosed something and totally changed how that treatment plan will go. What they play in their head, which is very hard, is sort of what did they miss? What would they, what happened on this particular case? And so again, how do we go in and sort of build more resilience and sort of put those, to your point, positive thoughts and everything in people's heads to really move that forward? You can't change the past, but you absolutely can change the future. So another question, I think?
Yep. So just for sake of time, this will be our last question that an audience member had written in. And I would ask each of you to briefly answer so we have time for final remarks. But the question was, each of you have a circle of people around you that you have the ability to directly influence. What do you do to empower your circle to find their own purpose and to improve their quality of life and health?
Who wants to take that first? John?
I'll jump in. I encourage people to make mistakes. I really do. That's the only way I learn. What I learned from. So it shouldn't be a one-mistake world where you're devastated. Now, there are some mistakes that obviously could be a one mistake, but if you're not taking risk, you're not learning. If you're not taking risk, you're not evolving. But you can't penalize someone for taking a risk. There's good risk and bad risk, and you got to evaluate it, and you got to teach people what is a good risk and a bad risk. But I encourage people to push it, take a chance. If it works, it works. The beauty on a lot of this is, if you make a mistake, you get to do it over. The world I came from before, if you made a mistake, someone dies. Mm-hmm. So this is a much more friendly environment where we can make a mistake and we get to do the experiment again. So I encourage them to try it. Doesn't work, we'll fix it. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. Thanks. Ty?
I would say, because John referenced his son and I'll reference my son, who I think is real crazy. I'm still trying to figure him out.
You okay with going?
But I had to be willing to allow him to be at this moment in time and to learn from everything that he may experience and teach him the lessons that he's supposed to learn through by being available and engaging in his life. Most of us are afraid to be who we are because sometimes we don't know who we are. And as soon as we find out who we are, just be it. Just be it. And allow the path to be laid accordingly. There are things, and I'm sure it was alluded to, there's various paths that were aligned for me that says, okay, you're supposed to go this direction, and you're supposed to do it this way. Psh, nah. I believe in God. I believe God has a purpose for everyone. The path that has been laid for me is for me, but I had to be it. So I want to teach and engage those who I love, and I have the pleasure of being a part of their life. Just be, and let's learn the lessons together. Because I'm not going to throw you away because you took a misstep or you made a mistake. That's when you embrace even more, because then that person can grow from that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rita?
So I think what I'm also here, I believe you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. And successes kind of keep you afloat, but really fail forward. Embrace those failures because they are such a teachable moment. And I do, being faculty here, I do see students that strive for perfection. I do see that they're afraid to fail in any sense of the word. So I encourage them to explore and also to find your authentic self. When we're not being authentic, it actually really can become very toxic. And humans have turned into human doers as opposed to human being. And really the word is a human being. So many times you just have to pause, as I said, Mr. Rogers' mother, pause and really appreciate that world around you, appreciate those failures. And actually, I've talked a lot about aging, because as you age, failing is not that big of a deal anymore, right? Right, people? Right? I mean, you just kind of expect it's going to happen, and then you move forward. That's why they call it failing forward. And I think for the people around us, we have to give them the room to fail, and then also to help them understand and process through that failure. It doesn't change who they are. Sarah?
And I think, one of the things that I encounter a lot in the work and the spaces that I'm in pretty frequently, since they're sort of social justice spaces, is that everyone is so concerned with saying the wrong thing that no one then says anything. And I think one of the things that I try to do, and I think we need to do a better job of in our society, is extending grace. And sometimes that grace and that forgiveness can be abused. But so long as people demonstrate growth in response, I think we need to do a better job. And I certainly try to do this, probably imperfectly, try to extend grace to folks, even if they're saying the wrong thing. It's better to have people speaking out and doing it slightly imperfectly than to have everyone silent.
That just made me think of Amazing Grace.
That's exactly right.
So there are two things that I wear pretty much every day when I come to work. One of them is a bracelet that says Carpe Diem, which is seize the day. And the other one is actually this bracelet that some of you may recognize. One piece of it has water from Mount Everest, which represents sort of the high points in your life. And what you need to remember is even when everything goes perfectly and you've had great success, be humble. And the black dot actually represents mud from the deep sea. And that actually reminds you that when you're at the deepest point, always have hope. So I'd like each of our panelists to sort of give a closing remark. We always try to think about the best questions to ask you, but sometimes there's a point that you would like to make about the power of purpose and what it's meant for you. There's been a lot talked about this evening, but if you have one last point that you want to make, what would you like to say? Sarah, do you want to start?
So I'll sort of put an exclamation point on a point that has been made that I think is so important. Secretary Landgraf mentioned that sometimes to experience joy, we have to understand and have experienced pain. And for me, that's certainly been reinforced in my life. This notion that hope, you talk about hope, that hope as a phenomenon and hope as an emotion only makes sense in the face of hardship. Mm-hmm. And what I have learned, and I also love that Mr. Rogers quote is one of my favorite quotes, to look for the helpers. And what I have seen in my own life is that in the last month of Andy's life, my brother, who's a radiation oncologist, said to me that I should look around me. It was going to be incredibly difficult, but I should look around me and take stock in the acts of amazing grace that would be everywhere. And that grace and those miracles, the kindness, was truly everywhere. And it turned what was going to be, and what was the most tragic experience in my own life, into a moment of just unimaginable beauty. And I think all of us have that possibility. We talk about change at the 35,000-foot level, but when we talk about change every single day, it's those little acts of kindness. It's those daily instances of amazing grace that, when joined together, creates change, not just in our own families, in our own workplaces, not just in our own communities and states, but across the country and around the world. And that's been probably one of the most significant lessons I've learned through the hardship and through the adversity.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. John?
I'll go back to what I said, my first comment. At 17, someone tried to define me, and I wouldn't allow them to define me. So in my mind, there's only one person who defines you, and that's you. And so you can either allow people to define you, or you can define yourself. And I would say there's only one person who defines you. And just remember, that's you.
Thank you. Rita?
So I was just thinking, as Sarah was talking, that nothing happens by accident. And I was just thinking, when you were talking about amazing grace, the fact that I got to be reunited with my first greatest teacher, Mike, as he grew into adulthood, and that I got to witness that he's actually okay. He's doing okay and enjoying his life, when I felt that we had impacted, his soul. The other thing, Kathy talked about bracelets, so I want to share with you 2 of my bracelets. So the one that I wear every day says, "Be brave." And so when I put that on in the morning, be brave. Just get out there. The second one says, "Nevertheless, she persisted."
Okay.
So between the both of them, that's how I start my meditation in the morning. Regardless of what comes your way, be brave through it all, for the good and the bad, and especially when you're working to support the human race, nevertheless, be persistent.
And Ty?
I guess I'll say 2 things. One, never stop learning about yourself. Never stop allowing yourself to grow. We're not where we're supposed to be. Well, we sure aren't where we were. And what you've been blessed with, you've got to take to the next level. And you may have to go through some pain in order to get to that next level, but go through anyway. Find somebody to connect to and go through it. The other thing that I will say, because this is what allows me to continue to fuel my purpose, is I don't allow fear to stop me, because I don't want to be a hypocrite when I say I love and I believe I can do all things. And I don't want to hate myself or others because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. So I try to walk in love, and I try to walk in humility, and I try to walk in my faith in everything that I do, and not allow other people to define me or allow me to be less than. So to me, purpose, it's a journey, but at the same time, it's what grounds me, and I stay grounded.
So what an inspirational evening, an amazing set of panelists. Help me to thank all of the panelists. And I want to thank all of you very much for coming this evening and participating in this, and I hope you come to the other conversations as well and invite your friends and your colleagues. And remember that they will be also available to do tours. I presume they would just come to the back of the Audion, and we'll be able to take you on a tour if you're so interested. But once again, remember the power of purpose, carry it forward. You're now all charged to go. So thank you very much.